The year was 2014, and the whole world was gripped by this Southern Gothic dread and philosophical brooding, which was created by none other than the HBO show True Detective. The first season of the show had an atmosphere so thick you could bottle it up, and amongst the fans, it wasn't just a hit, it was a revelation. The show, set in Louisiana swamps with existential monologues murmured softly with haunting tracking shots, crystallized this as one of the best seasons ever seen in television history. However, things started to fall apart. Each season came with new angles, trying something new. Some of them were noble, while the rest can be best described as baffling. So now you gotta wonder, what happened? How did the show that started off with such a huge bang wither away with a barely audible whimper? Well, that's what we're here to unpack, so let's get to it. True Detective premiered on the 12th of January 2014, and when it did, it was not marked as the typical cop drama. You know, the ones with wisecracking partners, episodic villains, and easy answers. True Detective had none of it. From the very opening shot, one with scorched earth and scorched souls, it was completely clear that the show was about something darker. It was about something deeper. Creator Nick Pizzolatto's vision was clear. He wanted to create a detective story that would peel back the layers and expose something unknowable and dark. The Southern Gothic charm met cosmic horror with just enough gritty realism to keep the whole story grounded. We had Cormac McCarthy-esque dialogue, but imagine it being filtered through an H.P. Lovecraft lens. The scripts were truly everything. Characters in this show not only hunted killers, but they also talked about the void. Dread and digressions lay heavy in each dialogue. Rust Cole, played by Matthew McConaughey, was unsettlingly magnetic. He didn't just chase leads, he also stared into the abyss and then tried to offer it a beer. His monologues about the illusion of time, the prison of identity, and the pointlessness of human consciousness are iconic for a reason. These monologues could have easily become a parody, but thanks to McConaughey, they were magnetic. They were poetry. Balancing that out with Woody Harrelson's Marty Hart was the best decision casting directors could have made. Hart was the more grounded one, a deeply flawed human who was trying to cope with Rust's intensity and his own moral failings. With this kind of pairing, are we even surprised that their dynamic was electric? We would go so far as to say that these two gentlemen created real magic on screen. While these two actors were certainly brilliant, the secret weapon that quite literally turned season 1 of True Detective completely iconic was Cary Joji Fukunaga. The mastermind behind Jane Eyre and Sin Nombre brought the cinematic elegance of big movies and tuned it perfectly for the small screen. Every time the camera lingered, every shot that devoured the Louisiana landscape, the now legendary 6-minute-long tracking shot of episode 4, all of it was just his way of sculpting the shots from scratch. These moves were bold, and they were usually reserved for prestige films. However, Fukunaga managed to not only prepare for these with the HBO budget, he also managed to pull it off in the middle of the season. This was not just style for the sake of stylizing the show, this was a masterclass in visual storytelling. The tension the characters felt was crafted in real time, and the show, as a result, looked nothing like the shows that aired on TV during that period. And then there was the structure of True Detective. The first season of the show told us the story in two timelines, one set in 1995 and another in 2012. Slowly, the two timelines converged into one. The murder of Dora Lange, who was found posed in ritualistic fashion with deer antlers, started off as a crime to be solved, but eventually it was the entry point into something a lot older and more terrifying, the Yellow King, Carcosa. These weren't just plot devices, they were symbols of something ancient, sick, and pervasive. Hart and Cole went deep trying to solve the issue, but the more they dug, the more reality unraveled. And from a certain point, even the audience began to wonder what was real and what wasn't. And then we got the quotes. Time is a flat circle. We are things that labor under the illusion of having a self. These were not just lines, they were mantras. Reddit fans have gone on entire Reddit thread tangents trying to decipher what Cole means in his rants, trying to theorize about the mythology of Carcosa and how the show was connected to the Lovecraftian mythos. I think at one point in 2014, everyone was a metaphysicist with their murder boards. When the reviews came in, everybody agreed on the brilliance of the show. Audiences were hooked and Emmy nominations poured in. Even to this day, after a decade, we still hail the first season of True Detective as one of the finest pieces of television ever made. The first season concluded on a note of optimism, the lights winning. However, who knew that behind the scenes there was a darker reality waiting for the show and the fans? Lightning in a bottle is hard to capture. Season 1 looked effortless, but the rumors that quickly emerged stated otherwise. Behind the scenes, tension was rising, especially between Fukunaga and Pizzolatto. The creative friction between the two guiding lights of the show began mid-season, and it only kept increasing as the series progressed. Pizzolatto wanted more control over the vision, and Fukunaga, the visual architect, felt constrained by Pizzolatto's grip on the story and characters. So the inevitable happened. By the time the show was getting ready for the second season, Fukunaga was gone. He directed every episode of season 1, which is an unusual feat in television. But because of this, every episode had a connection that spoke to us through just the visuals. Now, with him gone, the show lost its visual maestro and one of the very few forces that was capable of pushing back against Pizzolatto's instincts that are best described as indulgent. HBO, on the other hand, had some ideas about the show. They wanted True Detective to be an anthology series. Every season would give us a new cast and new stories. On paper, it made sense. The first season had wrapped up its story and the brand was strong, so it made complete sense to go down the American horror story route. However, there was an issue. Now, Pizzolatto was under massive pressure to create his new masterpiece with new actors and new mythology, and he had to do all of this without Fukunaga and without a writer's room. Pizzolatto wrote every episode of the first season by himself, like completely by himself. But now, HBO wanted him to do it again, without collaboration or pushback. With Fukunaga gone and the surmounting pressure of living up to his mythos, Pizzolatto's vision became completely shattered. Pizzolatto's stubbornness became a topic of stories that flew around Hollywood. The former president of HBO, Michael Lombardo, later actually came out with a statement. He admitted that Pizzolatto did not have a traditional writing team for season 2, and it was the main reason behind a lot of the issues that fans flagged for season 2. Lombardo admitted that it was his mistake, and that admission makes a lot of sense once you look at the way the True Detective trajectory went. The best way to describe the second season of True Detective would be to say that it had ambition, sky-high ambition, in fact, but the distinct lack of vision could not be made up for, no matter how much ambition the team showed. Season 2 of True Detective would have been a triumph, at least so it seemed on paper. They had a star-studded cast, boasting Taylor Kitsch, Vince Vaughn, Rachel McAdams, and Colin Farrell. Instead of the Louisiana swamps, the story was supposed to take place in California. The sun-scorched freeways and industrial wastelands were definitely the best setting for a plot involving corrupt land deals with multiple layers of criminal rot. On paper, this sounds noir. This looked like a typical prestige drama, but from the very first episode, everyone knew that something simply felt off. In the first season of True Detective, the mystery unfolded with an eerie momentum. Everything was moving, even when it felt like it wasn't. The slow moments of the first season had a purpose and resulted in progression on an overall scale. The second season, not so much, we're afraid. The pacing of the second season was more akin to a snail with copious amounts of sedatives making its way through molasses than prestige television. The characters were damaged, yes, but not in a way that made us go, ah, that's why they're this way. It was more like recycled stereotypes from any hard-boiled fiction. Farrell's Ray Velcro was a dirty cop with a heart of gold, and McAdams' Annie Bezarides was the mandatory female detective who had to have a trauma file. Frank Samon, played by Vince Vaughn, was a businessman trying to change his ways, and he was an interesting character, but Vince Vaughn's acting choices were highly questionable. He was so stiff that it felt like even a child could have read his lines with better acting. The plot was a tangled mess. We started off with the murder of a city manager, but then we had real contracts, land grabs, sex parties, betrayals, and a lot more. At some point, it feels like there are too many elements in the show, and now none of the elements stick. Entire threads felt meaningless. Characters had no resolution and no proper existence. And when the finale rolled around, well, by that time, a lot of die-hard True Detective fans felt like they would have been better off sleeping a tad earlier that day. Gone was the nail-biting atmosphere that got us all feeling some type of way. I mean, sure, in a way it makes sense. In Louisiana, we had moss-covered murder sites and decaying churches, giving us the sense that something greater than we could have ever comprehended was acting behind the scenes. Of course, we couldn't have that same kind of chemistry from empty highways and office buildings in the second season, but my point is, they could have tried to make it feel mythical. Instead, they made it feel mundane. Even the background score sounded out of place. Something was just off about the whole thing. The magic that the first season had created was simply gone. With no Fukunaga behind the camera, there was a significant deterioration of the visual storytelling. There were many directors behind the scenes across the season, and the series lacked cohesion. There was no painterly composition to look for. The long takes that made us fall in love with True Detective in the first place were replaced by generic coverage. True Detective didn't look like True Detective. Instead, it looked like any other show, just with that HBO money behind it. The biggest issue with this season was the distinct lack of heart. The first season gave us an emotional through line. We watched Rust and Marty's humanity and their contradictions, which made them even more human. But in season 2, there was none of that. We had characters, yes, but no soul. The reviews of this season, as you guys can imagine, were extremely brutal. Some critics tried to find the meaning of all the chaos that this season gave us, but most agreed agreed on one thing. This season was a sophomore slump. But that wasn't even the worst thing about season 2. The audience reviews were far worse. Reddit threads exploded with thinly, barely veiled disappointment. Memes making fun of the convoluted dialogue and needlessly meandering plot showed up everywhere. Season 2 became the butt of the joke, and the goodwill Season 1 created, that was utterly spent. But don't let that make you think that True Detective was dead. The show had taken a massive hit, but it wasn't dead. The unstoppable force of True Detective Season 1 simmered into an experiment gone wrong in Season 2. And then, the question that burned in everyone's mind was, can Pizzolato and HBO course correct, or was this series doomed? After such a brutal backlash from fans and critics, True Detective as a franchise found itself in a precarious position. Suddenly, the anthology series didn't seem like a good idea, and Nick Pizzolato, he was no longer hailed as a genius. Instead, he became a cautionary tale of how unchecked power can completely ruin something good. But despite all of that, HBO didn't pull the plug on the show. Instead, it let the silence take over. Fans wondered if True Detective could be saved for the 4 long years that it was gone. And for those 4 years, the franchise remained dormant. Nick Pizzolato had retreated into the shadows, and nobody knew what was going to happen to the franchise. But behind the scenes, something more reflective and deliberate was happening. HBO had learned its lesson, and so did Pizzolato. They both knew that if True Detective were to return, it would have to be a slow process. It couldn't be rushed. It needed to bring back the same core that made the first season so memorable. They needed emotional weight. They needed a case that mattered. And most of all, they needed a haunting atmosphere. Around 2017, slow rumbles of rumors spread about Season 3. HBO brought in some backup with David Milch, acclaimed crime novelist and the man behind Deadwood, collaborate with Pizzolato. It was clear that HBO was nudging its golden boy towards collaboration, admitting to the audience that this show was not a one-man show. While over time, Milch's role was minimized, the gesture mattered because Pizzolato was no longer operating in a vacuum with anyone but him and his ideas going amok. While Fukunaga did not make a return, Jeremy Saulnier joined the team along with Daniel Sackheim. Yes, the same Sackheim who was behind X-Files. While this duo wasn't as bold or artful as Fukunaga was, they brought something to the table that felt better than whatever the hell the second season was. They brought a clean aesthetic with a focus that served the story instead of overshadowing it. The cinematography of this season went back to the first season, giving us something moody and immersive. It ain't much, but it is honest work, and we love the return to form. In 2019, Season 3 of True Detective came out with Mahershala Ali playing Detective Wayne Hayes. He's a haunted Vietnam vet with a fractured memory and a razor-sharp mind. From the very beginning, something about this show felt familiar, and that, dear watchers, was the very point. Season 3 intentionally chose to be the spiritual cousin of Season 1. They went back to the split timeline thing, even tripling by following up on 1980, 1990, and then 2015 timelines. They gave us a missing persons case with some ritualistic undertones. 2 siblings go missing in a small town in Arkansas, and even though decades have passed, the truth remains hidden. Sounds pretty familiar, right? But there was a huge change that set Season 3 apart from Season 1. The first season of True Detective presented us with cosmic horror, while the third season offered something more personal. We focus on the horrors of memory, losing them, aging, and the lies we often tell ourselves. Hayes wasn't just solving a case, he was also putting himself back together. Mahershala Ali gave his career best performance, practically disappearing into the 3 different versions of his character. His aging makeup was uncanny, but his eyes anchored the season. Stephen Dorff played Roland West, Hayes' partner. Their chemistry was much like that between Rust and Marty, but this one had a softer, more tragic tone about it. Season 1 was about clashing egos and philosophical differences in my eyes, whereas the third season was about male friendship tested by time, guilt, and trauma. The emotional core of this season somehow hits deeper. These men, they were haunted by their own failures, a feeling that resonated with several audiences. The case in this season was very methodical, layered, and human. The show rooted the mystery in real-world pains instead of eldritch horror, which hit home for all of us. There was still ambiguity though, don't worry about that, but it was all grounded in realism. Some fans hated that there was no cosmic dread in this season, but others welcomed the shift. True Detective was trying to find itself again, and how can we ever complain about that? The Hour and the Day was one of the best episodes of that season. We got quiet revelations, intimate interrogations, and the creeping sense of inevitability, which affected me a lot more than cosmic horror. The series took us on a journey to the conclusion. It wasn't fast or quick, it was slow, confusing, aching, just like our main character Hayes. That's why the finale didn't explode with answers. Instead, it whispered to us. The big twist of this season, spoiler alert in case you haven't seen it yet, was how there was no conspiracy. It was just one human tragedy after another. A hidden child, a forgotten truth, a sick woman, and a detective who probably didn't want to remember. That final scene where Hayes is wandering into the jungle of his own mind isn't bombastic, but it was poignant and earned. was personal. Season 3 was not as universally praised as the first season of True Detective, but it certainly got more positive feedback than the second. Critics praised Mahershala Ali's soulful performance, mature themes, and the tight pacing. Some felt that the template of the first season was super evident in this season, but it's okay to play safe, especially after the disaster that was the second season. Still, a lot of fans felt that there was something amiss. The third season recaptured the tone and structure of the original, yes, but it had no mythic resonance like the first. It did not inspire cultural obsession or Reddit theories. It was a good season of TV, but lightning didn't strike twice, and True Detective didn't gain the reverence it was after. For Nick Pizzolatto, this served as both a victory and a warning. Because troubles were once again happening behind the scenes, Pizzolatto now found himself at odds with HBO. He wasn't happy with the studio because they kept pushing co-writing and collaboration onto him, which he didn't like. So at one point, Pizzolatto started creating his very own True Detective spin-off for HBO Max. Later, we got Redeemer for FX starring Matthew McConaughey playing a broken detective in Texas. But this show just didn't make it past the development phase. The creative differences and the sale of FX to Disney caused the project to collapse on itself. On the other hand, HBO was starting to get really tired of Pizzolatto's control over True Detective. They loved the brand, but they didn't think that Pizzolatto was crucial to it anymore. This all came to a head in 2020. HBO started working on the fourth season of True Detective, but this time there was no Nick Pizzolatto. That's right, folks. The creator of True Detective was no longer a part of the plan. This is where Issa Lopez enters the scene. The Mexican writer-director, popular after her haunting indie horror film Tigers Are Not Afraid, 2017, had a very different vision for True Detective, and HBO was willing to take the risk on her. She was writing the entire season and served as the showrunner. This was something unexpected. For the first time in the franchise's history, someone other than Pizzolatto was going to be steering the ship. At first, fans weren't okay with this. True Detective was Nick's brainchild, his voice, his obsession even. So how could anyone else capture the tone like that? Would they give the fans the same high-minded nihilism that Pizzolatto gave, or would they abandon it altogether? But Lopez wasn't one to back down. Her pitch was compelling. She wanted True Detective to be set in Alaska in the heart of winter, a remote town with no sun in the sky. 8 men would vanish from an Arctic research station. Now, a new pair of detectives, 2 women, come over to solve the mystery, only to get drawn into the indigenous folklore. Buried trauma gets exposed, and yes, the whole thing was uncanny. It was atmospheric, political, and very, very cold. Then came the bombshell that had us all stunned. Jodie Foster would star in the show. With that news, every skepticism the fans had shifted. Foster, on board with Lopez behind the screen, promising a blend of noir and horror, made True Detective feel fresh again. It didn't need to be something safe like Season 1. Instead, this time, True Detective felt fresh again, and it was forging a new identity for itself. Fans wondered what it meant for them. Night Country was openly supernatural in comparison to the gritty reality Season 3 was set in. It asked different questions like, what do we owe to the dead? Can truth survive in a world that is hell-bent on ignoring it? Critics and fans were both stunned by the ambition and the vision. It was gorgeous visually, with all harsh whites and stark shadows. There was the creeping unease of a ghost story that would send shivers down your spine. Narratively, Night Country managed to split the fans down the middle. Some felt that this was the most compelling season of True Detective since the first one, but others felt like it was a betrayal of everything that the original series once stood for. The detectives, Liz Danvers, played by Jodie Foster, and Evangeline Navarro, played by Kali Rice, could not have had more different reactions to the case. Danvers is cold, abrasive, clinical, and rules-bound. Foster plays Danvers with a bite we haven't seen in a long time. Rice, in her breakout role, does a wonderful job portraying Navarro, who is plagued and haunted by visions. She carried much of the emotional weight, and their dynamic is something a lot more painful and messier than being friends or rivals. As the season unfolds, spoiler warning, we learn that the scientists at this research institute were covering up this massive environmental disaster caused by a mining corporation. A group of indigenous women protested the mine, and one of them, Annie Kautok, was murdered brutally years ago. Her case, as you may have guessed, was buried, and now the sins of the town were coming back to haunt the place. At the heart of Night Country, we have the idea that places, like people, remember trauma. The mine gives people jobs, yes, but it also poisons the water. Ennis is a town that is built on silence, on denial. So, cops turn their heads to keep the peace, and everything goes on its way without anyone ever questioning what happened to Annie. But not anymore, because somewhere beneath the permafrost, it seems like Annie's spirit, or her memory, wants justice. Unlike other seasons, this one did not have one man as the killer. Instead, we get a system as a killer. Greed is the killer. The complicity of everyone around the place who looked away from the killer. Sure, we get the reveal of what happened to the scientists and who is truly Raymond Clark, but it's far less important than the mystery this one represents. The most shocking factor of Night Country was how ambiguous it felt. True Detective has always danced with the uncanny, like Carcosa, spiral symbols, and references to dark gods, but they were always grounded in human horror. But suddenly, this time around, it isn't. In the first season, the Yellow King was a metaphor for rot. In Season 3, we got some bits of ambiguity, but in the end, it showed us its hand. But not Night Country. Night Country instead leans more and more into ambiguity. Dead women are seen walking in dreams. A man, alive and well one moment, got swallowed by the frozen lake the next. Characters in this season hear voices, and then we get the return of the spiral from the first season etched into the ice. This gave fans hope that Night Country would tie directly into Carcosa, but nope, this was just breadcrumbs. And yet, despite all of these things, Lopez managed to subvert expectations. The spiral is a callback, not a hint for a sequel. The symbol appears as an echo, a visual motif for the cycle of abuse and buried secrets, and how inevitable it is for the guilt to return. True Detective was no longer just about solving a case, it was more than that. Critics praised the thematic boldness of the season. True Detective finally focused on female rage, indigenous trauma, and ecological decay, all important things that have a good center in horror as a genre. The horrors were now in history books, police reports, and the poisoned soil. Lopez wanted to give us a ghost story with detectives in it, and she gave us exactly that. And then, after all that was said and done, we got backlash. Not from the fans, but from Pizzolatto himself. Shortly after Night Country began airing, Pizzolatto made it clear that he was not involved with the season on social media. In a now-deleted Instagram comment, he stated how this season misused the elements from Season 1, and HBO had taken the show in a direction that he could not support. This was a public display of an author disowning the very franchise they created, and of course, fans got involved. Some took Pizzolatto's side, claiming that Night Country bastardized the existential tone of the original. On the other hand, others praised Lopez for breaking out of the nihilism and broody tone Pizzolatto had set. They said that Lopez had given the franchise a voice for the voiceless. HBO stood next to Lopez, doubling down. Before Night Country even finished airing, HBO announced that she would be returning to write and direct the 5th season of the show, making her the next creative face for True Detective, bringing the Pizzolatto era to a close. And, in true fashion, the reactions to this news were intense. Some fans were ready to riot on the streets, claiming Night Country to be the best season since the original because of the strong performances, the willingness to tackle social issues, and the horror-infused atmosphere. They found the ending poetic and open-ended, which sparked intense debate amongst the fans. The reverence True Detective had lost was back once more, but others weren't having it. Fans took to Reddit, where they complained about the lack of slow-burn realism and how the supernatural aspect takes away from what is generally conceived as the True Detective brand. Some fans even compared it unfavorably against other prestige horror shows like The Outsider or The Terror. But some fans believed this was True Detective trying something new. For better or for worse, Night Country got people talking about True Detective again. And in my book, that's as good of news as we were going to get. This was something True Detective hadn't managed to achieve in years. So, what happened to True Detective? The answer is simple. It evolved. The show began as a one-man showcase, created by Pizzolatto, showcasing this bleak, masculine worldview. We had a detective story that was dressed like cosmic despair. It started off strong with the first season, stumbled really hard in the second season, and tried its best to recalibrate when the third season came out. Then, it changed again completely with Night Country. The evolution wasn't clean and certainly not the most popular, but it was necessary. True Detective is never going to capture the exact magic of Marty and Rust, and to try to recreate that chemistry like Season 3 did only shows the limitations of the show. Lopez offered a bold reframing, taking True Detective from a one-man show to a platform. It is a structure. It is now a haunted house with different storytellers who can enter with their own ghosts instead of one man creating so many stories. By embracing the new voices and evolving, True Detective managed to avoid becoming a relic, and that is rare when it comes to prestige TV shows like this. A show being willing to transform, even at the cost of alienating its original fan base, is unheard of. The fusion of genres and the social commentary, these elements define the show just as much as The Long Take and Rust's monologues did. Marvelous verdict! True Detective is a story of transformation. From brilliance to misfire, from resurrection to reinvention, it has it all. It's the story of a franchise that lost its way, found it again, and then discarded it all to rebuild itself once more, following a new path. Instead of chasing its past, it forged a new future for itself. Not every fan will join this path, and that's okay, because the truth is never simple and justice is never clean. In True Detective fashion, some stories simply need more voices to tell them. True Detective survived, it adapted, and now it endures. Better than ever. Are you willing to adapt with it? Let us know what you guys think about Night Country and whether you prefer the Pizzolato era or the Lopez era of True Detective in the comments down below. Also, if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.